The wind screamed across the Wyoming plains like a living thing, tearing through the darkness of December 1878. No one in their right mind would have been out in that blizzard. No one except Fiona Blackwood, lost, freezing, and running out of time. The storm swallowed everything around her until even the sound of her own heartbeat was fading. She had thought she could make it to the next ranch after the stagecoach broke down. She was wrong. Her thin wool coat was soaked through, and her hands were stiff blue claws pressed against her chest. Every breath cut like shards of ice. The storm had separated her from the others hours ago, and she no longer knew where the road was, or if it even mattered. When her knees finally gave out beneath her, she sank to the ground beside a lonely pine tree, the snow already burying her skirts. Her copper hair clung to her cheeks, frozen in place, and her eyelashes glittered with frost. "This is it," she thought faintly. "This is where I'll die." She had no strength left to cry or call for help. The cold was a weight, pressing her down, closing her eyes. Then, through the roar of the wind, came the faint crunch of hooves on snow. She almost thought she imagined it, until a shadow on horseback broke through the whiteout. A man. Big, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a buffalo coat, his face half hidden beneath a snow-covered hat. "Miss, can you hear me?" His voice cut through the storm, deep and urgent. "Sweet Lord, what are you doing out here alone?" Fiona tried to speak, but her lips barely moved. The man was beside her in an instant, pulling off his heavy coat and wrapping it around her trembling body. The heat from it felt like a fire against her frozen skin. "I'm Thomas Reed," he said, his breath visible in the icy air. "And you're not dying tonight, not on my land." Before she could protest, he lifted her into his arms like she weighed nothing. She felt the jolt of movement as he mounted his horse, holding her tight against his chest. His warmth surrounded her, his heart beating steady against her back. "Hold on, miss," he murmured near her ear. "My cabin's not far. I'll keep you warm till spring, and after if I have to." The world faded into black before she could wonder what he meant. When Fiona opened her eyes again, she thought she must be dreaming. She was lying in a bed covered with thick quilts, a roaring fire casting golden light across wooden walls. The crackle of flames was the most comforting sound she had ever heard. "You're awake." The voice came from a nearby chair. Thomas Reed sat there, whittling a piece of wood, his green eyes watching her carefully. In the light of the fire, she saw him clearly for the first time. He was tall, rugged, and sun-weathered, with a strong jaw and hands that looked like they'd built and broken plenty in their time. "How are you feeling, miss?" he asked, setting aside the carving. "Alive," she whispered hoarsely. "Thanks to you." He smiled faintly, reaching for a cup of water and helping her drink. "It was a close thing. You've got frostbite on your fingers and toes, but I think you'll keep them. You were lucky." "Fiona Blackwood," she said softly after a moment. "I was traveling to Sweetwater. The stagecoach broke a wheel near Collins Creek. The others went to find shelter. I got lost in the storm." Thomas's expression hardened. "I heard about that. They said everyone made it to the Peterson Ranch safe. Damn fools didn't even know they'd left someone behind." He shook his head, muttering something under his breath as he stoked the fire. "You're welcome to stay here until you're well enough to travel," he said finally. "But that won't be until spring. Roads are buried for miles in every direction." The words sank in slowly. Fiona's eyes widened. "You mean I'm stranded here? For months?" Quote, "Afraid so," he said simply, meeting her gaze. "The nearest town's 20 miles south. In this weather, might as well be the moon." Fiona's stomach twisted. She was an unmarried woman, alone in a cabin with a stranger. Her reputation could be destroyed if anyone ever found out. "Mr. Reed, I can't impose like this," she said quickly. "Surely there's somewhere else I could stay." "There isn't," he said firmly, though his tone stayed calm. "And you're not imposing. I'm not in the habit of letting folks freeze to death. You have my word. Your reputation's safe. Come spring, I'll see you to Sweetwater myself." Something in his voice made her believe him. Maybe it was the steadiness, or maybe it was those honest green eyes. Either way, she nodded weakly. "Thank you." "Rest," he said, pulling the quilts higher over her shoulders. "We'll talk more when you're stronger." The next few days passed in a blur of half-sleep and brief awakenings. Thomas took care of everything. He fed her, tended her frostbite, kept the fire blazing, and made sure she was never cold again. When she woke one morning to find the bed empty and a note on the table, "Gone to check traps. Back by noon. Stay warm." TR. She realized she was smiling for the first time in weeks. That afternoon, curious, she explored the small cabin. It was plain but neatly kept, with shelves lined in books, real books, not the kind one expected to find in a frontiersman's home. She ran her fingers over the titles: Thoreau, Emerson, Dickens, the kind of books her father used to read. When Thomas came in from the cold, brushing snow from his coat, he stopped in the doorway, watching her with an amused look. "You shouldn't be out of bed," he said. "I'm feeling better," she replied, steadying herself on the bookshelf. "You have quite the library, Mr. Reed." His cheeks reddened faintly as he set down his gear. "Winter nights are long out here. Reading passes the time." "Were you a teacher before this?" she asked. He hesitated, the light in his eyes dimming. "No," he said shortly. "Just a man who's seen too much." She wanted to ask more, but his tone warned her not to. Instead, she smiled faintly. "Well, thank you again for saving my life." He met her gaze, and for a heartbeat, neither looked away. The fire cracked between them, the storm raged outside. And for the first time, Fiona wondered if perhaps fate had led her into this storm for a reason. The days passed slowly after the blizzard, each sunrise marked by the faint orange glow that crept through the cabin's small window. Fiona's strength returned little by little. With every passing day, the color returned to her cheeks and the spark to her eyes. Thomas Reed had saved her life, but she soon realized he'd given her something else too: peace. For a man who lived alone, Thomas was surprisingly gentle. He spoke little, but his actions spoke plenty. When he wasn't tending to his traps, chopping wood, or checking on the animals, he was making sure she had tea, warm broth, or extra blankets. Fiona had never known kindness so quiet, so steady. By the end of the week, she could stand without her legs shaking. "You've been fussing over me long enough," she told him one morning as he set down a tray of food. "I can make my own breakfast." Thomas smiled, a small but genuine smile that transformed his face. "Well, Miss Blackwood, if you can handle the skillet without fainting, I won't stand in your way." "I won't faint," she said, lifting her chin. And she didn't, though her hands trembled as she stirred the eggs, feeling his gaze on her the entire time. As the storm outside began to calm, the two of them fell into a rhythm that felt almost like life. She cooked, he chopped wood. She read by the fire. He carved small pieces of wood into shapes she couldn't yet recognize. In the evenings, they talked a little more about the weather, the books on his shelves, or the noise the wind made through the chimney, but never about his past. Whenever she asked, his eyes grew distant, and he'd simply changed the subject. It wasn't until one quiet evening that he finally spoke of it. Fiona had been darning a torn shirt, while Thomas carved something small and careful near the fire. "I came west after the war," he said suddenly, his voice low. "Couldn't go back to the life I had before. Too many ghosts following me." Fiona looked up. "And yet you built a home here." He nodded, staring at the fire. "Not alone. My wife Ellie and our son built this place with me. She loved it here. Said it was the first place she could breathe." His jaw tightened. "Influenza took them both the winter after. I buried them on the hill out back." Quote. Silence filled the room, heavy but respectful. Fiona's eyes softened. "I'm so sorry, Thomas." He nodded once, his face shadowed by the flickering light. "You don't have to be. Life takes and gives. I didn't expect it to give me a second chance." He paused, meeting her gaze across the fire. "Then you showed up in that storm." Her heart gave a strange, quiet flutter. She looked down quickly, focusing on the thread in her hand. "I was lucky you found me." "Maybe," he said softly, "or maybe it wasn't luck." From that night forward, something shifted. They didn't speak of it, but both felt it. The air between them grew heavier, filled with a quiet pull neither could quite ignore. Days turned into weeks. January crept in with its bitter cold, yet inside the cabin, warmth lingered. Fiona found herself laughing again, teasing him about his coffee that could strip paint off a barn door. Thomas would shake his head, pretending not to smile. One morning, he taught her how to track rabbits in the snow. Another day, she showed him how to bake proper biscuits instead of the rock-hard lumps he'd been living on. They grew comfortable. Too comfortable for two people who kept reminding themselves this was temporary. Then came the day Thomas didn't return by noon. He had gone out early to check traps before another storm rolled in. When the sun started to dip and there was still no sign of him, Fiona's worry turned to fear. She paced the cabin, glancing at the door every few seconds. Finally, as snow began to fall again, she couldn't stand it any longer. Grabbing his spare coat and rifle, she saddled his horse, Juniper, her breath shaking in the cold air. "Please don't let me get lost again," she whispered to herself as she rode into the whitening world. The wind bit at her face, and snow stung her eyes, but she pressed on toward the ridge where Thomas usually hunted. Every sound made her heart jump. Then, faintly, she heard it, a voice, carried on the wind. "Fiona!" She turned Juniper toward the sound and spotted him through the snow. Thomas, limping heavily, leaning on a makeshift crutch. Relief nearly knocked her breath away. She slid off the horse and ran to him. "Thomas, you're hurt!" "Stepped in a hole," he gritted out. "Ankle's bad. I was making my way back slow." He tried to smile. "You shouldn't have come." "As opposed to leaving you out here to freeze?" she said, wrapping her arm around his waist. "Don't argue with me, Thomas Reed." It took everything they had to get him on the horse. Fiona climbed up behind him, her arms circling his waist to hold the reins. The heat from his body seeped through her coat, grounding her even as the snow swirled thick around them. When they finally reached the cabin, both were half frozen. She helped him inside, half carrying him to the bed. His ankle was swollen and angry purple, but she worked quickly, removing his boot, wrapping the injury tight, and placing cold cloths over it. "You came looking for me," he said quietly, watching her hands move. "You could have died out there." "You know why?" she said simply. Her words hung between them like a spark that couldn't be taken back. Thomas's eyes darkened, his jaw tightening as emotion flickered across his face. "Fiona." "Rest," she said quickly, her cheeks burning. "We'll talk when you're warm." But the truth was already out. The next few days, the roles reversed. She cooked, cleaned, fed the animals, and made sure he stayed off his foot. Thomas hated being confined, but didn't fight her. He watched her move around the cabin, hair tied back, sleeves rolled up, determination on her face, and something deep inside him began to ache. On the third morning, as she changed the compress on his ankle, their eyes met. He reached up, brushing a stray curl from her face. "Fiona, about what you said." She caught his hand, holding it to her cheek. "Do you want me to go?" Quote. His thumb traced her skin, rough and gentle all at once. "No," he said finally, his voice low. "God help me, I don't." Her eyes shimmered. "Then ask me to stay." Thomas hesitated only a second before pulling her closer, his forehead resting against hers. "Stay with me, Fiona Blackwood. Not just till spring. Stay. After." Quote. The kiss that followed was soft at first, then fierce, full of the warmth they'd both been starved for. Outside, snow fell silently over the Wyoming hills. Inside, two lonely souls found the kind of warmth no fire could ever give. The days after that kiss felt like living in a dream Fiona never wanted to end. The storm outside had eased, but inside the cabin, another kind of warmth had taken hold, the kind that made her heart flutter every time Thomas smiled or brushed her hand. She tried to tell herself it was foolish. Come spring, she was supposed to leave for Sweetwater, start her job as a schoolteacher, and begin a new life. But every day that passed made it harder to imagine walking away from the man who had saved her, cared for her, and now looked at her as though she was the only thing keeping him alive. By early March, Thomas was moving around again with only a slight limp. The ankle had healed, though not completely. He insisted on taking back his chores, but Fiona still helped him feed the livestock, draw water, and mend the fences that winter had battered. The days were longer now, the snow melting in slow trickles down the hillside, and life at the cabin began to feel like something new, something shared. One afternoon, as Fiona hung laundry by the fire, Thomas entered carrying a bundle of wood. "You're working too hard," he said, setting the logs down. She smiled. "Says the man who chopped half a forest this morning." He grinned, leaning on the table. "Old habits die hard. I guess I like keeping busy. But watching you here, doing what you've done, I realize I haven't felt this kind of peace in years." Fiona's cheeks warmed. "And I haven't felt this kind of purpose." He crossed to her slowly, his boots silent on the wooden floor. When he reached her, he gently took her hands. "You've brought life back into this place, Fiona. You've brought life back into me." Her throat tightened. "You make it sound like you'd been waiting for me." "Maybe I was," he said softly. "Maybe that storm was meant to bring you here." She looked up at him, her heart hammering. "Then don't let me go." Quote, Thomas hesitated only long enough to reach into his pocket and pull out something small. It was a silver ring, simple but beautiful, with a small wooden heart carved into its center. "I made this," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "The silver came from my late wife's locket. Ellie's. The wood is from the pine tree I found you under. 2 parts of my past to start a new future if you'll have me." Fiona's eyes filled with tears as he knelt before her. "Thomas, I thought I was rescuing you that night," he said. "But you rescued me. I don't want to go through another season without you. Will you marry me?" Her answer came through a rush of tears and laughter. Yes, Thomas Reed, in spring and after, for all the seasons to come. He slid the ring onto her finger, and when he rose, she threw her arms around him, sealing their promise with a kiss that spoke more than any vows ever could. Spring came at last to the Wyoming Valley. The snow melted, the creek ran strong again, and green began to push through the earth. The cabin, once a shelter for 2 strangers, now stood as a home filled with light, warmth, and love. Their wedding was small but beautiful, held outside the cabin, with the Peterson family from the nearby ranch and a few townsfolk from Elk Hollow. The preacher read from the good book while the wind carried the scent of pine and the sound of rushing water. Fiona wore a simple white dress she had sewn herself, and Thomas couldn't take his eyes off her. When the preacher declared them husband and wife, Thomas pulled her close, his voice trembling as he whispered, "I meant what I said that night in the snow. I'll keep you warm till spring and after." Fiona smiled through tears, "And I'll keep you company for every winter to come." Years passed. Seasons turned. The cabin grew, 2 new rooms, a front porch, and laughter echoing through its walls. Fiona stood one April morning by the stove, stirring a pot of stew, while their daughter, Elena, tried to stack wooden blocks on the floor. Outside, Thomas helped their little boy James feed the chickens, his laughter ringing through the yard. Fiona rested a hand on her stomach, smiling at the gentle curve beneath her apron. Their 3rd child was due in autumn, and her heart was full in ways she could never have imagined that night she'd nearly frozen in the snow. When Thomas came in from the yard, he wrapped his arms around her from behind, pressing a kiss to her cheek. "What's that smile for?" he asked softly. "Just remembering," she said, "a promise made in the storm." "The best promise I ever made," he murmured. She turned in his arms, resting her forehead against his. "And the easiest one to keep." Outside, spring sunlight poured through the window. Inside, the warmth of family filled every corner. Fiona thought of the blizzard, of the pine tree, of the man who had carried her from death to life, and knew that fate had brought them together not just to survive a winter, but to build a lifetime. That night, when the children were asleep and the fire burned low, Thomas looked across the room at his wife. "You remember what I told you that night?" he asked. She smiled knowingly. "I remember every word." He reached for her hand. "Then let me say it again. I'll keep you warm till spring and after." And he did, through every storm, every year, every season that followed. Because sometimes love doesn't come from where you expect it. It comes from the cold, the dark, the edge of despair, and burns bright enough to last forever.